Thank you so much for hosting us again. I appreciate that. We did a town hall here a couple months ago, and
Seems like yesterday.
right, and we made a promise that we would come back here.
Yeah.
So, so thank you to spending your Memorial Day weekend with us. When we arranged this, I didn't realize it was Memorial Day weekend that we were doing this. I thought Memorial Day weekend was next weekend. So, my bad, I apologize. But thank you so much for coming, I appreciate it. I am State Senator Ann Rivers from the 18th. It has been my pleasure to serve you for the past almost 8 years as Senator, and then 2 years prior to that as a member of the House of Representatives. So I am on Senate Rules Committee. I am on Ways and Means, which is about not only how revenues are raised, but how they're spent. In the House, it's different because they have it separated out. And then I'm on EET, which is Environment, Energy, and Technology. And also on healthcare, which is where my passion lies. I am the Republican whip for the Senate and serve on a multitude of boards and commissions appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and my leader to serve in those capacities. So those are sort of my bailiwicks. I'll head off to Representative Dick.
Well, yeah, thank you for being here. We'll get you past the rainy part of Memorial Day weekend and then hopefully sunny after that. And I think the real challenge is wrangling the three of us to be in one city at one time. So this weekend happened to work out. I am Brandon Vick. I'm your state representative for position 1 in the 18th district. And if you don't know the 18th district completely, it's kind of non-Vancouver, Clark County. We have a little bit of East Vancouver. We have to fly to Salmon Creek area, and then we've got most everything else that's not Vancouver and in Clark County. It is my 7th year in the legislature, 4th term, and my committees deal a lot with business and finance type issues. Ranking member on a committee we call Consumer Protections and Business. Doesn't actually do much consumer protection work, but we do bank regulation, insurance regulation, business licensing, kind of that gamut. I'm on the Commerce and Gaming Committee, which we kind of jokingly refer to as a SIN committee. It's regulating tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, and gambling. And then the Finance Committee, which is where tax policy goes through. Senator mentioned we do it in 2 phases in the House. We have the tax policy and then the spending committee separate. Senate does those together, which is probably a better way to do it, but I hope you can hear that. What else do I do? I just got off a 6-year stint on the Legislative Ethics Board. It was fun. It wasn't because I did anything wrong, but 6 years of telling your colleagues they're doing things wrong is enough. And I serve on the Gambling Commission for Washington State, so that's kind of my daily routine. And then, of course, we get to delve into every other issue that is important and that we vote on.
My name is Larry Hoff. I'm the other representative from the 18th district, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for hosting us again. We wanted to make sure that as we talk to folks in the 18th district, we never forget Yacolt and Amboy. This is all part of the 18th district, and often, often we just didn't wanted to make sure that you guys weren't treated like this redheaded stepchild. So we're going to be here again as often as we can. So, I've been in the House of Representatives now for a whole 5 months. I was honored to be elected last November and started on January 7th, I think was our first day. I'm also on 3 committees. I am on Brandon's Consumer Protection and Business Committee. It'll probably change names again next year. But again, he explained it very well. It's essentially that where we take a look at contract issues and business banking issues. So it's kind of my background. I retired from the credit union industry after 35 years, so I have that. I enjoy listening to issues that involve contracts and things like that. Other committees are labor and workplace standards. That's where we hear everything that deals with public sector unions, employment contract issues, things like that, bills that are kind of generated under that umbrella. And then appropriations. Ann mentioned that she's on Ways and Means that talks about revenue and spending. Well, appropriations in the House is where the spending bills go. Every dime that we spend on your behalf, hopefully, goes through that committee. So I'm learning every day. I enjoy most days. I said in the last town hall, there are some days that I just assume that we could have do-overs. But it's been an interesting experience, and I appreciate the honor. So.
Thank you. Well, it occurred to me as I was getting ready for today's meeting that, you probably know that this is true, I do all the talking, or a lot of the talking. So I said to Brandon this morning, you guys are going to talk more than me today.
What happened?
Right? Well, I did pretty well. I did. I tried to manage myself. So Brandon, if you want to just take it from here.
Yeah, I think maybe just a little background. This was our long year. This is our budget year. We do 105 days. There's technically not a day off, even though most weekends we were able to get home and see our family, which was nice. But this is your big year, right? You not only do the budget, but most of your major policy lifts are coming this year because you just have more time. Next year we go in for 60 days, hopefully, and that's kind of cleanup work. What did we get wrong in the budget? What needs to be tweaked in order to work? Those are hopefully what we're going to do next year. I'm sure they're going to throw some big policy things at us as well, but that's kind of the background. We could do town halls one of two ways. We could kill an hour and a half and never let you ask a question, or we could do it the other way and just start with the questions and get you guys the reason you came here. So I think that's what we're going to do. Yeah. Just if something's hot on your mind, ask us. If you want some more detail before you ask a question, that's great too. But let's just open it up and have fun. Sure.
What's the Republicans' party, their plan to turn things around, to make things more equal in legislature? And so the people out here, like our voices, are heard instead of being overrun by the big cities. Does the Republican Party have any plan whatsoever?
Well, I think if you're a Republican, it was not a good election for us. We went from, just 2 years ago having a Republican Senate and a 1 vote difference in the House, well, 2 votes for 1 person, to pretty deep minorities this last year. You could chalk that up to a lot of things. You could chalk it up to an anti-Trump wave. You could chalk it up to a whole bunch of reasons. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter because I think our voice was lessened. I think we still got plenty of good things done, but a lot more bad things happened, and that's a problem. I think starting out, it starts with candidate recruitment and finding candidates that really match their areas. We had a phenomenal freshman class this year, but again, it was too small. And so I think we need to find people, and we are, that are much more, not only in tune with their community to start with, but maybe represent some of the changes that are going on in our state. In the House, we have probably less female legislators than we should as a Republican caucus. We have 1 minority in the Republican caucus. And so I think we're looking for folks who represent their communities in that way a little better. But I think we also just have to, as a party, as a brand, be more upfront. I think we find ourselves playing defense a lot. We get accused of someone. We're like, no, we're not the bad guy, as opposed to being forward with our ideas. Our state party chairman, and I'm going to slow down because we don't want to get into election stuff. This is a public meeting. But the state party chairman, I think, has a very good plan. We could talk offline about that. But I think part of it is just saying, these were the proposals we put forward. These are the proposals the other side put forward. These are why ours are better, and do a better job of being forward with that instead of responsive, as we probably have been as a large group too much.
Another thing to consider, and I heard this over and over, I wasn't in the legislature in 1993, but there were many lobbyists who were lobbyists in 93, and I don't know if you guys heard this at all, but I heard over and over, oh my gosh, this is just like 93 with all these tax this tax policy and these social policies. And in '94 was the largest Republican wave to ever hit our, in fact, that was the year that Mark Bolt was rolled into office when he did just his Brill Cream yard sign thing. So people are saying that the 25 billion over 10 years is going to have the populace smarting a little bit, and it may have a negative impact. Who knows? But I do think that I agree with Brandon about people don't know. People have no idea what actually happened this session, and so part of our job is to let people know. And people across the spectrum may respond differently, but at least they'll all have the information, and then they can do with it what they want.
Your question has very deep roots in actually how the legislature operates. We talked a little bit earlier about the fact that the majority and minority was closer. You had a majority for a while based on a coalition.
Yeah.
So then you have the ability to talk about compromise. You have the ability to talk about, well, that really isn't a good bill for our constituents, but how do we make it better? When the majority and minority are so spread apart, it's 57-41 in the House, 27-21, I think, in the Senate. Then it becomes less of the majority's desire to say, yeah, we want to make it better, instead of this is the way it's going to be.
Ram it in and break it off.
Yeah. And so it's vital to get a part of the legislature in the opposite party. Split government isn't a bad thing.
I like it.
Yeah.
I think it's a healthy thing.
So I guess to stay away a little bit from the election discussion, but it's important that our party ramps up and gets excited about getting our story out.
One thing I think is interesting too is Washington's always been very interesting to me in the fact that, you put a tax on the ballot, it fails, right? The voters in general seem to be pretty careful of their pocketbook. And then on the social side of things, kind of a carpe diem, right? The conservative viewpoint doesn't generally win at the ballot box there. And that's why I'm saying that is I think the voters are going to have to make a decision coming up, right? Because there is a strong segment that says we want to be the Kashama-Sawant Seattle. And there's another strong segment that says, hey, remember that pocketbook thing. And I think the voters are going to have to reposition themselves at some point. They're going to have to pick. And gosh, I don't know how many families are just rolling in the cash right now, especially after this legislative session. But I think there's, kind of like Ann mentioned, some hope that people finally get to see what happened this year and says, wow, they went too far. And we need to reorganize the chairs on the deck. So that's, again, that point of reckoning is coming now. Is it Bernie Sanders Washington, or is it, I don't know, Mitt Romney Washington? It's probably not going to be, Barry Goldwater Washington, but.
Well, I just hope the Republican Party, I'm just stuck on what you said about not enough women, not enough minorities. I hope the Republican Party looks for the best man.
Absolutely.
Right,
we are not hung up on
Best
that.
qualities, regardless of what they're built like.
And we are not hung up on anything in that respect, but I think it's also important to have that honest discussion with yourself, and we should. So, but no, if it's not the best candidate, then why would we want that person making decisions for all of us? Absolutely.
I'd like to address the issue of property tax for senior citizens. I've been a senior citizen now for long enough to get a fishing license for a senior citizen. So, property tax is my biggest single expense every month. I have no mortgage, it's bigger than food, it's bigger than any other single item. Many states, by the way, I've read enough of the Washington State Constitution to know that the legislature is allowed, specifically in the Constitution, you are allowed to give seniors property tax breaks. The next door neighbor, since her husband died and her income is really low, she qualifies for the tax break. I don't. But I can see the day when I'm on a fixed income, have been for 5 years. I can see the day coming when I have to sell the house because I can't afford the property tax. Other states have done a lot of things for senior citizens in general, regardless of their income level, and Washington has not. And we seniors need that in order to be in our homes. I had actually planned on one of these protests to increase property taxes. I had rounded up a small group of senior citizens who were willing to carry signs saying, "Don't tax me out of my home," and march in front of these pro-tax people. So we are desperate for somebody. Thank you.
So we passed a bill out of the Senate this year that had a reduction for seniors and veterans, disabled veterans. And then it went over to House and it came back and it ended up being a King County only bill. So it focused only on residents in King County and cut everyone else in the rest of the state away. And that's reflective of the partisan makeup. Seattle has such density that they have greater representation than we do down here in the more rural areas. And so they can do those kinds of things. And when I said earlier, ram it in and break it off, that's really how it felt so many times. People talk about taking the approach of one Washington. We want one Washington, except we want one Washington to be treated better when it's King County. And I think that that's wrong. So I voted no, I voted yes, and then I voted no because you can't take out a segment of the population and think that that's going to be okay.
I would think that that wouldn't be constitutional in most states.
You'd think not, but here, the Constitution here in Washington State is just merely a guideline, just kind of a suggestion somebody made. And that gets really frustrating. We just enjoyed another attack day before yesterday by the governor who line item vetoed out of our transportation package and also vetoed in a couple of locations just one word, which is absolutely unconstitutional. It is.
He's allowed to veto a section via the Constitution.
He can veto an entire section, but he can't like pick and choose because, for example, shall versus may. Shall says you got to do something. May is, yeah, you know, if you feel like it. You can't take those words, every single word matters, so you can't take them out. But this will now be the third time that he's done it. He did it 3 years ago, and I know this personally because I helped to write this part of the budget, the healthcare part of the budget, where we had saved $400 million for pharmaceuticals by being our own state purchaser of pharmaceuticals for Medicaid. And he vetoed that. Why? Who can say? But it put a $400 million hole in our state's budget by doing that. I don't care who you are, that's a lot of money. Almost $500 million. So but we didn't say anything then because we thought, what can we do? There's really nothing we can do. So now this has just become the way that he does business. The good news is on that thing I just heard from some Democrat colleagues that they are now feeling very concerned about this becoming the new norm. And so they're taking some steps to organize a legislative veto of his actions. But it's in this year when he's running for, either EPA or Department of Interior, whatever he's running for, Katie bar the door. It's all about,
There also, that was also the chance of judicial action on the table. For senior property taxes in general, just kind of background, if you make $35,000 or less, You don't get a property tax break in the form of we're just going to lower your property taxes, right? But we'll freeze them where they are. They're not going to go up again. That's what the state does right now. There was legislation to do two things. One was raise that to $50,000. And that was kind of the King County shrink that happened there. And the other thing was to be able to deduct things like medical expenses from your income if you were trying to get to that $50,000 mark. That was something that actually our assessor, Peter Van Norwick, was a champion of. And I think we're going to readdress it next year. The one thing that is cautionary, I guess, in that is the city is not going to lower their budget. The state's not going to lower their budget. So that money is going to be borne by the people not getting the property tax
just
rate.
get spread out.
It is a shift. The question that we have to ask, and I think people generally agree with though, is that the right public policy to give seniors, a chance to stay in their home? And I think generally we wind up a yes on that question. But that's just kind of the warning. Everything does have a, balancing act there. But it is. We have a tricky constitution as far as actually, we can't give money. There's no gifting of public funds, so there's that. And everything has to be uniform in theory. Uniform by geographic boundaries.
Also, we don't send children to school. That's a general rule.
Understood.
We are done doing that.
Yeah. So not an argument, just that's kind of the lay of the land right now, and I think that will be brought up again next year because property taxes are going down.
No, they're
At least not by much.
not. Carol?
There's one thing that we, in our research, have discovered that is an issue that we believe is a huge impact for the folks in Clark County, and that is that our county, claiming under the GMA that this is what they're supposed to be doing, is buying up, taking out, transferring lands to other nonprofit organizations that are taken out of the tax roll. And they're very valuable pieces of property. So whenever that's done, and we were shocked at how many thousands of acres this county owns, supposedly setting aside for parks, that they will never develop. And they're way beyond what the requirement for parks to ratio people. So, but what I see is a little bit of a disconnect, and I really appreciate you coming to Yacolt. And I missed the last one, and this time I thought I'm not going to miss this one, because I think this community is a growing, prosperous potential that is pushed back, if you will, via the core city of Vancouver. I remember back in 1994 when the attorney of Vancouver was the attorney for Yacolt and cut back their urban growth boundaries in massive degrees. Same with the Center and Ridgefield and all of those. And the state has been holding that up. And this city, particularly now with the railroad and the bill that passed for the railroad, this city is poised to become an economic engine of the community through here, and via that has the opportunity for new infrastructure to be put in, roads and access and so forth and so on, and economic development. That was what the railroad was for. So we've got 3 large companies that want to use the railroad for transport of rock. We have numerous timber companies that are wanting to use the railroad for timber transport. That's what it was all about in the beginning. But these communities have been left out of the equation. I can remember back in the years when, I think it was Betty Sue Morris even, who was telling the mayor of Vancouver that there's more than one city in Clark County. And she got ostracized by our party for saying that. So I think it's important that you folks connect to these communities, especially when the legislature, tanks, so to speak, or when you're out, you're in the minority, and at the legislative level, there's not a lot you can do, and you try, but that's the best you can do.
In the minority.
I mean, sorry, in the minority. But when you get to that degree, I think in the localities, in your local community is where you can make a better impact or more impact that will help to put the right people in the places that you want to be successful at the legislative level.
Making that connection with Yacolt and Amboy and West Center is vital, and we're doing that as we speak. Getting to know the mayor and the council and you folks from this area helps us understand what we can do, what the need is. And then we just ballpark these transportation budget issues, capital budget issues, and see if we can't help that economic engine in some fashion. I think you're spot on.
Well, you know, even the assessor, Peter Van Norbeek, you know, you folks going to him and telling, you know, this is what you're hearing from your constituents and so forth, means something to him. I think that these communications between our legislators in the state and our local legislators that are elected officials, particularly if you know that they're more on your side, I think, you know, getting something done on the local level is really what it's all about. So,
There's going to be issues where everybody doesn't have the same opinion, though. And yet when it comes down to Yacolt, this kind of forum is critical to get opinions from. We just left the town hall where there was a variety of different opinions, and a lot of them didn't agree with the way we voted. And yet, it's that kind of exchange is critical. We hear what they want, what they suggest they need, what they suggest is how we should vote. We hear from you folks about railroads or infrastructure or economic engines, and that helps us understand what our, or molds our direction up in Olympia. I think you're right on this issue. Connecting is the issue for me.
And I think, you know, we probably always thought we've done a pretty good job at that, but I think this year, I know Larry and I have noticed something different, and probably has too, but we've been asked by a lot of constituents, hey, we need your help talking with the county and a couple of the cities. Yacolt's not on the list. But, and I don't know why that is. I think maybe it has something to do with moving to the kind of manager form of government, that it's a little harder to get in the door and talk to people. But I mean, there are folks who are like, we've got a business, we've been doing it right, we've done everything we're supposed to do, and all of a sudden we've got this hurdle and no one's given us an answer. And so I think we definitely, since we're actually in town, you know, hopefully for the next 7 months or whatever it winds up being, I think that is a very important thing we can do more of. And I think we're going to, hopefully we can be less reactionary, because that's usually how it gets spurred, right? We get an email with someone's hair on fire, and we should respond to those. But I think getting those conversations moving now maybe helps us build for other ones too. So, but I think the point's well taken, and obviously the constituents are feeling it more than they have in the past too.
Well, the grist mill, you know, they were going to have their party, and they just got shut down from the health department. No more, they're not.
By the health
but
department?
I think it's interesting that the wineries, on the other hand, can do anything they want with their food. They can have well, there's one we know that has cats and dogs walking around while the food is being prepared.
It's got to have a 3-bin sink, right?
And yet the grist mill, you know, these historic people who have spent thousands upon thousands of dollars and hours to improve that and to make it a viable thing for the community are now shut down.
You know,
I mean, there's something wrong with it.
The interesting thing about the grist mill issue, and I won't spend a lot of time on that, I dug into it a little bit, and I now have seen that there are a variety of opinions on that particular issue. The health department is saying, no, we didn't tell them that. And the grist mill folks have said, well, you just told us we can't do this, so where are we? That's the interesting thing about getting folks together in a room and really figuring something out. And that's where Ann and Brendan and I think, can be the catalyst periodically for these things. So,
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, you're not off the hook that easy. My question is on McCleary. McCleary really put us into a tough situation all over the state, really. And what is the plan going forward? Because what we have happening right now is not sustainable for our schools.
Well, legislation was just passed this year that will assure McCleary 2.0. McCleary was about making sure that there was equity for all students across the state. And with
Let me interrupt you. What she meant was that there's going to be another lawsuit.
yeah, there'll be another lawsuit probably in 2 or 3 years. We put, I think, $11 billion more into public education, still not enough. And I said this at the last town hall, and I thought maybe one of the community members was going to wring my neck, but I believe this to my core. It doesn't matter how much we could put in. We could put in 50 billion more. It's already 52% of our total state budget, and it will never, ever be enough. And yet somehow, with all the money that was generated, we were only able to give a relatively small amount to special ed, which if you looked at any of the ed boards, any of the candidates, what's your number one priority? We have to take care of special ed. We've got to do that. And then they throw a pittance at it, and it was heartbreaking. I couldn't support that bill. I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. Our priorities seem crazy right now, but we will embark upon yet another journey to inequity because of the bill that just passed that said, yeah, go ahead and raise your levy, it's all good. But the people, so let's take Yacolt, Battleground, because the kids in Yacolt, remember, we go to Battleground schools. The voters here want to see something for the money that they're giving. When they don't, it makes it pretty hard to check the yes box. So the Battleground School District has had a tough time traditionally in passing levies, right? Both bonds and levies, actually. So now what are we going to do? So now we're going to say, it's okay, Battleground, solve all your woes by passing a levy with your people. Well, our people don't. So what happens to Battleground? Battleground slips behind her and behind her and behind her, while Issaquah, I know that's not really a word, I just made it up, behind her. Legs, however it makes you comfortable, I think you know what I mean. While Issaquah, on the other hand, can pass levies for anything, right? So now you've got the teachers in Issaquah getting $14,000 more from levy dollars, and you got the teachers in Battleground who got a kick and scratch for any kind of a raise at all. And the per pupil funding, same thing. Is it fair that a kid in Battleground is going to have $11,500 while the kid in Issaquah can have $19,000, $20,000?
Well,
So my whole point in sharing this with you is to demonstrate the complexity. It's not just about our little area, but also to say that we are rapidly undoing everything that we did in 2242 to try and bring equity. It's all gone now, and that's after $11 billion, and the meter's just going to continue to run. So for those of you who think that I hate teachers, I have to confess right now, I was a teacher, middle school math and science, and so I know the gig, I know the drill, I understand what it's like to be in the classroom. So it's not that, it's just that at some point you have to say, when is enough enough? And I shared in Camas, I have in Clark County, the people my seniors who lost their homes were largely from Camas because they already had high property taxes and it just went up by leaps and bounds. And I think that's a trend that will continue. And that I think is people don't, when I say that, people kind of glaze over like, how can that even be? But some of these property, if you're on a fixed income, how can you have no place to absorb that to. Unless you go out and get a job at Walmart or wherever in your golden years. And get behind her and behind her. So I'm going on and on, but I think that we, by dismantling the work that we did to solve McCleary, I think that it won't be long and we'll be back in the same boat.
And this is really, and it's tough not to have an answer to your question, right?
Well, so I just want to say, my son goes to a private school and his tuition is like $7,000 a year. And that takes care of a really, really good education. I don't understand why it takes $14,000 or even $10,000 per student to make a school work. I don't understand.
I will tell you that our schools have become our largest social safety net. Our schools, for kids who don't have families, I know that in La Center, we had a kid whose parents met him at the gas station. He was a 16-year-old kid. They filled up his gas tank and said, "We're moving. We'll let you know when we get to wherever we're going." No place to live. Left him. No home. He moved in with us. So that was a lucky thing for everyone. But the point that I'm making is that our school districts are expected to pick up a lot. They're dealing with homeless issues, they're dealing with drugs, they're dealing mental health issues, especially Battleground, which has a very high youth suicide rate. And all of that takes money. So I believe that Battleground is doing the very best that it can do, but it's the common denominator problem, right? And how do we know that every kid's getting what they need? Because some kids need a little more. But, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm only saying whether you like it or not, our school districts have become our largest social safety net.
Well, I think, along that train of thought, public schools are always going to be more expensive because they have to take everybody, right? I believe we've overshot the mark, though, as far as what that dollar number is. I think we could do a better job with equal or less money. That being said, I think getting back to this McCleary thing, though, we have to find a new plan forward, right? Because 2242 is the number, right? 2242. That's a good bill. That fixed McCleary. It asked taxpayers to take a year of pain, which sucked, but we were going to have a system that was fixed. There was going to be 3% a year raises. There was going to be, everything was dialed down to the detail. And that was that split government, right? And Ann was on this committee for 4 years of your life, 6 years of your life?
6 years.
That was undone the year after, right? We took away, the legislature took away that 3% cap. We put $1 billion in, and there was the free-for-all that everyone saw on the news to get that money. And then this year, the promise that was made, we're going to lower those local levies, that was pretty much taken away. Not completely, but pretty much. So, Larry wasn't there yet, but I mean, at the table, the decision was there. It was right, and now we have to find the new decision, because with these levies, there will be inequity. That was McCleary, period. It never said you need more money in education. It never said you need raises. It maybe touched on that, but it said there has to be equity. We're not going to have that. So there's not a silver bullet right now with the political makeup. Like, I just don't have the proposal for you that would pass tomorrow. But that's what we've got to do now, because we turned it upside down. The legislature turned it upside down again.
It'll take constant attention. It's my
I was just interested if you guys could have a say in, kids can't start kindergarten early even if they're ready, and they're not supposed to wait either. I'm having to deal with that with my kids and a friend's child, where she's really wanting to wait for him to do kindergarten, but the preschool is like, no, because of his birthday, which is a day before the cutoff, which is ridiculous.
And he's a boy.
Yes.
Sorry to all you men in the room, but boys
yes,
are different.
it takes longer, and I want to know, what can be done for this, like, placement, so that we're actually, because there's so many specialists in the classes. I'm in there volunteering constantly, and kids are just being taken out in the middle of whatever lesson that they're doing, so they're missing out on what they're supposed to be learning to go, back to work on something that they should have already learned. So that seems to be the biggest problem that I see firsthand when I'm in there. It really bothers me, because I'm like, well, of course they're going to be behind.
I agree
They're
with
going to
you.
stay behind, so you're making it to where they can't go to their full potential because they're always feeling like they're lacking. Or the ones that are always ready to go ahead, they're being held back.
That's
When
our biggest
they're not
problem.
reaching their potential.
Right.
And so a lot of this money that's just being, given away is for all these specialists that we don't actually need. We need to place the kids based on what they're ready for.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that you've said. And that is something that can be determined at the local school board level. I don't know if you've reached out and talked with any of your school board
members. There's been some that came here. I was previously a council member, so I remember talking to them when they had come out here. But there's so much that they were asking for at that point. It was the laws and levies that didn't pass.
I mean, I suppose there could be something legislative that we could look at. I just don't know what that is. Some sort of competency evaluation for those that are right on the bubble.
Because I wasn't even allowed to have my
Right.
kid test in to go, when she had already spent 2 years at a private school and gotten a great education,
Yeah.
which another thing is food is included with all of that at a private school, whereas we're continually going under to pay her lunch bill when all these other kids that she goes to school get it for free, so where can that be equal? That'd be great.
I will share with you that Brandon and I have a bill this year for everybody calls it something different, highly capable students, to try and identify them very early and get them into programs, because so many, we don't have a very proud record for graduation in this state. Only 75% of our kids are actually graduating, but a huge chunk of that 25% are actually highly capable kids who are disengaged because they're bored and they're like, this is still, why should I do the homework? I know this already, right? And so it's a mess, but we had a bill and we got it almost all the way done. And at the 11th hour, it was killed, which really kind of was not very fun for us. But there is a growing recognition about the different needs. Part of the problem that we have is there's a growing mentality among the very progressive left about cradle to grave education. It should be free, it should be, but right, and you,
already at the same time.
part of that is, and we saw it introduced this year, I anticipate it'll get through next year, was the home visiting program. Every baby that is born in this state has to have a certified...
Visit by the state.
A visit by the state, which is horrifying to me. And Senator Wellman, when she was speaking about the bill, said, we want the loving arms of government to be wrapped around every single child right from the start. And I was like, I can't believe you just said that. But thank you for saying that.
So they overstep their boundaries at some point because who's to say, who's
So,
even determining these things?
Back to Cheryl's
Clean
question.
enough.
Yeah. Well, and we actually had one foster father who had 6 foster kids. It was a foster parent situation. He is independently wealthy, but when you enter his home, he has a crucifix like you walk in. I've been to his home. You walk in and there's a crucifix right
It's
there.
too dangerous,
No, he might be imposing his morals on the foster. So they tried to take all his foster children away, because we can't have anyone with a moral compass actually trying to force their ideology on these poor foster children. And it's just like, what are you even doing? These kids would be on the street but for this guy. So what are you, I don't get it. Just because they happen to see a cross in the entry of his home, without any further discussion, wrote a report about that. It was Mark Jurassic. Did you know that? Yeah. So, it's a hard thing. It's like, we want government, but then we hear about this stuff and then we go, ooh, I don't think I want that government. But this is truly the direction. When Brandon Early mentioned Kashama Sawant, she's the socialist who's on the Seattle City Council. So when you hear Sawant, Sawant-esque, or Sawant the socialist, and she pushes all of these, but I will tell you, that is the direction that our Senate went this year. We had very moderate people who were replaced by these people who think that government is the answer to every single thing. So.
We saw that in the House as well. It's an interesting direction, and it's like government just has to be a part of every piece of your life. And that's why you see a lot of the votes that run on party line, because we just couldn't stand for that.
So I got a question. If the federal constitution requires that all states have a Republican form of government, how is it that people who are declared socialists are even eligible to run for office and swear an oath to something that they, by principle of what they believe in, are opposed to the whole idea of a republic?
I think because our schools are wrongfully teaching that we live in a democracy.
Bingo. And so what about the constitution education element of our public education?
Right?
It doesn't exist, or what? I don't know.
No, not very much. I mean, only in a cursory way. But
I think it's difficult. I mean, this year we had legislation that bolsters the social studies program, which in theory would include that. What's the danger, though? Well, you hand it off to the school, and what does the school determine
They interpret it.
that is? And we don't really have state curriculum. We have some, but it's not really what we try and do.
Right. It's really token. A while back, I saw that there is a law that says teaching of the Constitution is required. Fill in the blank on what that
Right,
comes down
exactly.
to.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But in Oregon, there's actually a law, it's been there since 1923, and it literally requires all public schools to provide a class devoted to studying the Constitution for a minimum of 5 years. From the 8th grade to the end of high school, you're required to have a class on the Constitution. If you go to college after that, it continues. It's ORS 336057. And so it's still there looking at us on books or then. But if you want to borrow from the full faith and credit clause of the federal Constitution and say, wow, we really like that model they have down in Oregon for Constitution education literacy, we want to put that to play in our schools too. We want to borrow from their idea, and it'll do two things. One, it'll really jack up the constitutional literacy of our body politic, and we might not be voting on things like 549 and 1639 the way we have. And it will also call out the fact that Oregon has, for 80 years or more, literally suppressed the operation of that law. That law does not see the light of day in public school. I graduated from Oregon schools. I got 3 months worth of Constitution education. History class is not a Constitution class. You can be taught all kinds of things about history, but unless you have Constitution education, you can be lied to all day long, you'll never pick it out. You've got to have Constitution education filters to call out the BS of our history classes.
yeah, lies my teacher told me.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and it's still going on,
Yeah.
and it probably even a lot more so right now, and it's slipping every day. And so unless that problem gets fixed, I mean, the ripple effects of constitutional illiteracy is so immense. It's like having an inferno that's kicking out spot fires that we're constantly having to chase our tails putting out, but until that inferno gets taken out, we're constantly going to be chasing our tails with those
Could
spot
you
fires.
cite that statute again?
ORS 336057.
Noted.
And 336067 requires special emphasis on the state constitution, and I got 0 on the state constitution.
Which is crazy. I mean, if you think about it, our Washington State Constitution is one of the strongest state constitutions in the entire union. It's certainly stronger than our federal constitution in many regards. But it's definitely the strongest state constitution. And I bet if you asked high school students, if you asked any student, if you asked college people or even a guy on the street, they would never ever know that, how strong our Constitution is.
A lot of people don't know there is a state constitution. I've talked to people who literally don't know, but there is
Right.
such a thing as a state constitution,
We
which is
talked-
indictment.
We talked a little bit earlier about the majority-minority kind of difference here, and I think that's where we start to work on that inferno. Your discussion is getting me excited about things we might be able to do. The challenge we have is to get enough like-minded folks that might give it some success in the legislature, but I appreciate the discussion.
One last thing on that, before I there's a case called Wilson versus Chancellor from 1976. Came out of Malala High School, and there was a socialist speaker that was scheduled to talk to the students of Malala High School students, and the parents came down on the school board and said, you will not let a socialist speak to our kids and pollute their minds with socialistic sympathies. And so the teacher who was putting this event on sued and won. And the judge's reasoning for the teacher being allowed to bring the socialist in was his citing of that law as a reason for why these kids are not, in his words, easy prey for a socialist speaker, because they have 5 years to study the Constitution and get it in their head what it's all about and why it works and the history behind it. And so the laugh is on him, because at the same time he was saying this about ORS 057, the schools themselves weren't carrying it out, and the socialistic influences were pouring in and taking over the minds of the kids. That's why we have the Bernies right now. That's why we have the Ocasio-Cortezes right now. That can't happen when you have 5 years, for example, to study the Constitution.
Would you guys be willing to work on that? Can
Oh
we get
my gosh,
a
yes.
commitment? to
I'm gonna go look it up
Yeah.
as soon as we,
Yeah, that's what
As we speak.
Will you let us know?
Right.
Thank you all for being here first. Appreciate that. I've got a question about volunteer firefighter pensions. There was 2 bills, one in the House of Representatives, one in the Senate. It was self-funded, it's solvent, and we're not talking about $1 zillion. A volunteer firefighter after 25 years, and most of the geographical Washington State is covered by volunteers. The major cities, those are paid firefighters. But we were asking for the current retirement after 25 years is $300 a month now. And it was going to be funded again by the volunteer and the fire department paying into it.
Yep.
And it was going to be increased by $50. It looked like it was sailing, and did it get cut at the 11th hour or what?
Want to know what happened?
Please.
Just for the record, I voted yes.
Okay. Good.
Senator Vandeweghe killed it. He's a firefighter, not a volunteer firefighter, he's a professional firefighter, and they don't want any impediment to, so that's what happened. And I had worked with your lobbyist, a gal named Tamara Warnke, and we thought we had gotten it through, and he sort of caught us, and he killed it.
It passed out of the House, it must have.
Right. It was
It
looking
got killed
good.
in the Senate. It went over to you guys, came back, and then he didn't, he thought you guys were gonna kill it over there. But that's what happened. So, I'm sorry.
Well, let's run it again.
We'll make another run at it for sure, because,
So do we put his house on the do not respond list?
no, you know what I really would appreciate? What I really would appreciate is all your members across the state reaching out to their legislators and saying, this is simply unacceptable. There was no skin off your nose
Right.
or off the
Yeah.
operating
No
budget.
worries.
Why are you doing this to us? We perform a very important function. And make it so the next year when he says, no, I'm going to kill this, they look at him and go, you're crazy, we're not killing this. Because people need to hear from their legislators that this was a bad thing that happened. So that would be really helpful
Let's do
if
it
you
again.
could do that.
Okay,
It'll
do it
run again and then, but because the bill didn't die for good this year. The bill just, will be reintroduced at the beginning of, because a bill stays alive for 2 sessions. So the bill will be, it will,
In the 60-day session.
but the other legislators need to know that this was a bad thing that happened, and they need to know why. So that would be helpful.
and that senator, is a firefighter, right? So in that caucus room, they probably turn to him and say, hey, Mr. Firefighter, what do you think about this bill?
This bill's bad, we need to kill this.
We have one firefighter as well, but a lot of cops. But that does happen. I mean, if you have an expertise in an industry, you tend to think, okay, well, that makes sense.
We'll defer to him because clearly he knows more than
Yeah,
us.
so.
Thank you.
I'm going to go here and then I'll go back to you. Karen.
Okay, recently, the governor signed into law, I think it was SB 4594, effectively making Washington a sanctuary state. Is there
Oh, that
anything
was an executive.
in the offing to get that killed?
It would take his-
Minorities.
So there will be, I've heard legal action on that as well. What is probably more unknown is we've been operating under these auspices since 2017 when he had his executive order. the executive order was basically codified into law this year with, I think it was Ortiz self-bill. But yeah, it's sanctuary state is a good enough way to describe it. It's probably not completely that, but what it says is that law enforcement can't ask your status, whether they're responding to something you did wrong or you called, whatever. And so it's problematic. I don't know for the life of me why you wouldn't want to know everything you possibly could about an individual who had committed a crime or was involved in an altercation at some point. Again, it's kind of a broken record thing. I don't have the votes to do it tomorrow, but there are some good groups outside the legislature that will be taking it to court, and we can always absolutely try and revisit it, and we should, because this is a basic public safety thing.
And there may be some who say, oh, you're racist if you want to do this, or you're anti-immigrant and all. And I have a sign outside my office that says, if you want to be here and you want to be a lawful citizen, you are welcome at my campfire. I welcome every race, color, creed, because that's what America is. But if you don't want to follow the laws, I have no patience for you. I'm not going to waver. And how many news reports do we have to see about the atrocities committed, and we send them back home, and then a couple months later they're right back here. So I think that America is founded on immigration, but you make a commitment that you're going to be here lawfully, and you're going to follow the laws when you get here, and you're going to be a good actor and a contributing member of our fabric. And if you don't, then what are we doing?
It is tough to explain the hyper-partisanship that kind of happened this year. I mean, in this realm, the kind of Latino community, or this section of it, had their things they were going for. There was a bill that literally, it was in the Senate, that literally said farmers are going to have to pay a fine for each slave that they own.
Yeah, they called them slaves.
H-2A program.
They called them worker slaves.
Slave was the terminology. It's like, this is not real. This is not happening. If it is, those people should be in prison, absolutely. But it's just a fee. You're going to pay a fee for each H-2A worker because they're de facto slaves. It doesn't pass the smell test, but it's real politics right now.
And one of the H-2A workers was making $32 an hour.
And get their housing paid for.
Yeah, they get their housing paid for, and so it's like, I never met a slave that was that well compensated before. It's kind of crazy.
The glass
Please.
The glass half empty response there is this, once it goes into the court system, it's just anybody's guess. Depends on which judge hears it, which system figures their arguments are sufficient enough, and just like we talked about the Constitution issues, we're seeing kind of damages to the Constitution regularly.
Is there anything going to be done about the judicial system so that they're strictly color of law and right of law, and they're not a partisan towards any liberal or conservative?
Yeah.
They're elected.
That issue, I'd like to propose an idea, but get around for it. The same thing, Article 4, Section 4 says the United States shall guarantee a Republican form of government. And the essence of what a Republican form of government is the operation of legislatively enacted law. And so the governor himself, through color of law, through his office, wielding the power of his office to reject and rebel against the operation of what is legitimately federal law on immigration matters. He doesn't have the luxury of being able to do what he's doing. He is in open rebellion against that federal mandate that the federal government is in charge of taking care of the immigration problem. Therefore, if he's in open rebellion, they can invoke the guarantee clause and kick him out through the guarantee clause by his open rebellion to the federal jurisdiction of that matter. As an idea.
That's an idea. That is a very big idea.
It's effective. It's a guarantee. It's the supreme guarantee. It's because it's the supremacy clause, and it's a guarantee. It's a supreme guarantee that a Republican form of government shall be in place.
Thank you,
two things about the school districts. One of them is I noticed that the city of Vancouver, their urban growth boundary or urban area is out there to 119th and going beyond. And yet that's still in the Battleground School District. How do you determine these districts? Because Battleground School District is probably the largest, or, but we're educating youngsters that are taking the advantage of the city of Vancouver's advantages.
So,
That,
yeah,
and also cursive.
I agree 100%.
You know,
Don't
I
get me
asked-
started.
I asked my grandchildren, do you know how to read cursive? And most of them do, because their mother has been teaching them. But I said, well, your mother, just one of them just the other day, I said, your mother just happened to get an award for her beautiful cursive, but when she was in school. But I tell them, if you don't know how to read cursive, do you know what you're missing? And they say no. I said, you won't know how to read the Constitution of the United States, because it's written in cursive.
So much history.
So, these are things that we have to hold on to for our children. But these school districts that are educating City of Vancouver kids and City of Ridgefield or any of these, there's got to be, how do you figure those boundaries?
So there's an actual boundary review just for the schools. And here's the tricky thing is, the school districts will try to negotiate huge boundaries in the hope that industry comes in and gives them more money for tax base. But when you have culturally diverse areas in one district, so Battleground School District, 10,000 bus miles per day, 10,000, that's how huge it is. Something's not working quite right? And then the literal culture, like Carol, my kids who are in 4-H, the bulk of them, when I go to the FFA fair, sale at the fair, the bulk of them are from my North County area. Why shouldn't those kids have access to classes that they're more interested in where we can, and farming, right? Farming, agronomy, livestock, all of those kinds of things. But we're sort of suppressing that with the way that the districts are set up. And so La Center and Ridgefield were in a fight for years and years and years. It was a bloody battle. Nobody won, nobody lost. And at the end of the day, it is all about the money and the hope a lot of times that we're going to get major industry in that's just going to be a boon to the economy of the district. And you know what? It rarely happens, because even at Exit 16, where the casino is, they're not contributing to the tax base of that school district.
And that was Clark County's fault that that happened.
Don't
because
get me
they down
started.
zoned.
But anyway, so yeah, I mean, it's done by a boundary review board who, manages, and when districts want to change or split, or sometimes even come together when Winlock went belly up, and then they were it was Winlock, I think, and Vader went belly up, and so Winlock, Vader became one school district. They had to approve it, but it's a governmental structure that manages it. It's crazy.
How much of the school system's money woes come from this, what I perceived as a massive influx of out-of-state people moving into the area?
Ridgefield right now gets 2 new students a day. That's a lot.
Has it been parsed out, which ones are out of state, which ones are within?
Not that I'm aware.
I'm sure it's a woe. I think it's also a shorter term woe, because they get funded on a per pupil basis. It would take a year for that money to catch up. Obviously, building size is going to be your biggest problem, although all these new developments are putting some money through impact fees into new buildings. But I would say that's more of a short-term problem than a systematic failure. Because, it's designed on a per pupil basis, so they should be getting the revenues they need, or we think they need.
Well, growth has, interesting tentacles. I mean, it's infrastructure, it's schools, it's grocery store. I mean, it has the whole kind of city planning issues wrapped all around it. So I think the communities are working hard at trying to understand that growth and project for it. I don't know if it's successful or not.
But it just came to light, a couple of the school board members of Ridgefield caught Carol and I with Clark County Citizens United a couple of weeks ago concerning the funding that's tied to the interchange at 179th, which is put on hold because the urban holding is back on there again. And nearly all of those students proposed to live in those developments are in the Ridgefield School District. And there's a disconnect between the monies that Clark County pulls for the impact fees for schools and what Ridgefield actually charges. What the county collects is way less, and it forces the school district to always play catch-up because the school district does not get those impact fees until that house actually changes hands and is sold.
You're
So that's
saying
one
the county's impact fees are lower than the city of Ridgefield?
Yes, but the big kicker is that the school districts can't get a hold of that money. It's in some escrow account or wherever it is in no man's land until that home is sold.
And the reality is those impact fees don't go to building new buildings. The impact fee goes to buying portables.
Yeah.
And so, because it's not enough money to actually contribute, and in fact, I don't think they can't bond against the impact fee. So I think the hope is that then the new property owner comes in and they become a property tax paying person, and then they can bond against that. But I am no expert in this section of.
And every community is so different.
Yeah. And Ridgefield doesn't even get LEA or levy equalization because they're too rich. Whereas Battleground gets quite a bit of LEA because they're not rich. It's not a question, it's a question of what is possible. And there's a lot possible in Ridgefield and not as much possible in the Battleground School District. And I think a lot of it is just size.
But
so big.
There's a lot of talk about concurrency issues for traffic, and the park impact fees. It just seems so, and this is state driven at the state level, that's why I'm bringing it up to you folks. There doesn't seem to be concurrency for the schools in that regard. So they are constantly playing catch up with the portables.
We actually did this year, I don't know if it made it out of the House, Jamie Peterson's bill. Currently, when a school district plans, they're not, to do a new building, they cannot plan for any growth at all. So for example, La Center opened up a new high school and the very next day had to have 4 portables delivered because they weren't allowed to plan for what they knew was coming. And so we put the bill left the Senate. So you'll see me say to Brandon what happened, because once a bill leaves our body, it may pass the House and then be signed by the governor, and we don't really know unless but with thousands and thousands of bills, you can't keep track of everything. So I rely on these guys to tell me, did that pass, did it not? But the point is, we have to give school districts the ability to be successful too. And part of it is being able to buy in today's dollars the capacity that you know that you're going to need in a year, 2, 3, 4 years time. And when we know, looking at the plats, we know the people are coming, right? So we know we're going to have a need. And so I'm disappointed that bill didn't pass because that would have been very helpful.
I'm fairly certain it did not. I have to look.
That would have been really nice.
You had a question?
Yeah, in a kind of change of subject, you guys were talking about this committee for business and labor. I forget the name of the committee exactly, but what are you doing for employers in this part of the state when, I'm trying to think, but I know my general liabilities have all gone up. Like this, like my risk class rates have gone up. Federal, you obviously don't have anything to do with, but being an employer in Clark County is difficult.
You may be one of the 90,000 employers that your B&O tax is going to go up as well. I'm not sure what
Correct.
profession you're in, but it could very well go up. There was actually a war on business this past.
There's not a lot of
session.
incentive to be a business owner.
It was, you know, and I hate to banty that word around loosely, but we killed a bunch of bills that would make you projectile vomit. There were some very, very bad bills for business that we were successful in stopping. Independent contractor bills or more impact or more fees on employers. A bunch of bills that involved the construction industry that would have just crippled their business. So I say there was a war on business, and actually we talked about that on the floor of the House often. Your question as to what are we doing for employers, in the minority we worked very hard on your behalf to stop some of the major kind of impacts. We weren't successful all the time. B&O tax went up. Some of the employers that value business coming from Oregon now, based on that sales tax reimbursement versus just immediate credit, they're going to be impacted dramatically. So there's a variety of things that weren't good for businesses, I'm sorry to report. But the good news is that the Senate and the House was at least mildly successful in kind of slowing down the bleeding. And if you'd like, we can give you some of those, some of the bad ones that we were able to stop.
If you want a silver lining, it's I think we did a better job. It's going to cost, but in workforce development, so I'm able to find skilled employees. Hopefully, in at least a few years, we'll have a better track there. I think as far as what we can do now, though, it's a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff. I mean, I'm working with a handful of clients with L&I right now on their rates and why they were classified. And I'm not saying I can necessarily get them the answer they want, but I can tell you when Larry or Aaron, I call L&I, it has a different impact than when you're banging your head against the wall trying to do that. So I think if there's hurdles that shouldn't be hurdles or you don't believe should be hurdles, that's something we can work on with you. As far as the greater ecosystem, I mean, it's just that whole elections have consequences thing again, and it doesn't feel good to say, there wasn't anything that we could do on that one, but I just, right now, it's let me do what I can do outside of the legislature, and we'll give it another shot next year, because that's really the best answer I can give.
It feels really good, though, to Brandon's credit and Ann's credit, and my kind of being the new kid on the block. It feels good to stop one or two, to be successful in whatever regard we consider success. I hate to paint that that dark picture, but we had some bright days when we stopped a few of those. So.
Thank you.
Guns. May I ask how you guys, I know I may have said 549 over here, I meant 594. 1639 as well, their initiative fruit. Can I ask how you guys voted on those personally?
Oh. Yeah, personally, yeah.
They didn't come to the floor, those were initiatives.
Right.
When the ballot came.
Right, that's what
Yeah.
I'm asking. And a friend asked me to ask this question to you, Mrs. Rivers.
Why did I vote yes on hating on the plastic gun?
Oh.
Because it's a freaking plastic gun. Come on. I asked my son about this because I was really laboring over it. It was really hard for me, and I said, honey, what do you think about this? He's 27 years old. I took him to hunter's training when he was in the 5th grade, as I did my other son. And he goes, well, Mom, he goes, we need to be able to print our guns, 3D print our guns if the government comes to take our guns away. And I said, a single-use gun, I think you need a better plan than that. I think you need a better plan. So there are people who will say, oh, this is the camel's nose under the tent flap. I have to tell you, the camel's head is under our tent flap. And if I'm gonna worry about something, it's not gonna be something that's, it's already federal law. Yeah, duplicitous, so why should we do it? Because it's already federal law. But you know what? I'm really tired. I'm a hunter. I got my first gun when I was in the 4th grade.
Okay.
And I'm tired of defending dumb people who do dumb things with firearms and then threaten all of the rest of our 2A rights.
Well, you know,
And so my thing is on plastic guns that are destroyed after a single use, why have one of those
how
when...
many cases, I'm asking, like I said, on behalf of my friend, so you're reacting in terms of a plastic gun. My understanding is you can also make printed metal guns as well. Now, what about the 80% lowers?
So by federal law, a certain percentage of these disposable guns have to be metal anyway, but we have not, when we were hearing this bill, we were told that there are not metal guns that are 3D printable. We were told that they're plastic, they leave no rifling, and the heat of the firing destroys the barrel, so there can't even be any rifling marks. So rifling marks can't be used as a forensic measure to determine wrongdoing with a gun. But the larger point is, you know, they may be a fun novelty item, and maybe somebody can actually afford a 3D printing machine, and maybe somebody can actually afford to do this. But for me, a single-use gun,
Right.
I think is ridiculous.
I hear the logic of what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with you. Basically, if you're shooting a plastic gun, it might as well just be a grenade, a plastic grenade kind of thing, potentially. It blows up in your face. But what about the 80% lowers? I understand you voted against those.
That was part of the overall, and the 80% lowers are such a small portion of.
So that was lumped in with the.
It was all lumped in together.
Okay, so the plastic printable guns and the 80% lowers were part of the same bill?
Yes. So I'm going to spend my time defending 2A rights. And the NRA said, this doesn't hurt your stellar rating with us. We don't, this is of no concern. So you can, whether you like the NRA, whether you don't. But my whole thing is this. I'm going to continue to defend my 2A rights and the 2A rights of the people whom I represent, because in my district, we do have subsistence hunters.
It just
And I'm not going to defend dumb people who do dumb things with guns and therefore take away the ability to ruin the prospect of me maintaining my 2A rights.
But isn't that just a matter of shepherding the conversation to make sure that it's not being framed in terms of, look what this one person did, all of these guys are bad now. You can't allow that to take place. It's totally an improper framing of the issue, but you've got one bad apple spoiling the whole barrel. So
it's not one bad apple. It's not one bad apple.
Percentage-wise, what's the percentage of people who abuse their rights versus, and there's always tort law and criminal law to take care of the bad apples anyway.
Well, you would think if someone has the ability to use the legal system, but it's broke. Our legal system toward and all of that. You know what? Here's the bottom line. Nip it in the bud. Don't let it. And it's a federal law today. I didn't do anything. My vote is not any different than the existing federal law. My oath of office says I will uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States, the Constitution and laws of the state of Washington. So for me, and you know what, I know there are people who are worried about the camel's nose, but I gotta tell you, 1639 is the camel's head, and this is a distraction. So why did we put it in state law? I don't know, but it's in federal law. I'm gonna burn my daylight worrying about more important things.
So what does federal law say on 80% lowers?
I don't know. I mean,
Because it seems to me like if the 80% lowers were thrown under the bus by token of having them stuffed into the same bill with the plastic guns that are an automatic no-go. That's what it seems to me like.
I
I'd have to do
that
more
is.
research,
I
yeah.
don't know that. I don't know if it's in the federal law or not.
So, thumbs up or down on 8% lowers. By themselves as an issue.
oh, by themselves, I'm fine with them. I have no problem with them.
So basically, it went down. It's, my understanding is it's made illegal now, starting July 1st, or I'm not sure when. At a certain point in time in the future, it will be illegal to buy them and finish them and stuff like that. Is that fair?
Well, I think the whole goal is
That would be
that,
news to me.
the whole goal is that you want to have a serial number on the pieces that you're putting together. I mean, that's the whole point of what they're trying to do is maintain the integrity of the tracking system. So, I mean, I don't know that what you're saying has a basis in reality. So, and I'm not saying that it doesn't. All I'm saying is no one has ever said to me that there's going to be.
Yeah, I'm sitting here with a question mark. We're going to take a look at it.
Yeah.
And before you get out of here, make sure that we have your information. So
What is your name?
Ben,
Ben what?
Ben File.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll make sure we get back to you. With the lower issue regarding that, kind of the tack onto this other bill is something that I'm not completely familiar with, straight up. So-
And I, myself, I'm feeling a little bit on the fence sort of thing as far as, because I'm a little bit unfamiliar with the whole issue myself. I'm just here to ask, because my friend really wanted to be here, couldn't, he had a job to go to, so I'm asking it on his behalf, and just kind of feeling your
I do a
answers
lot of
out.
things for friends too.
Well, fair to say we all need to look a little more at
Asking
this
for
one.
a friend.
We're also like a 5-minute warning too. so.
Okay.
I just want to ask each of you, before you vote yes or no on any bill, will you know the bill, please? I hear Ann saying that you didn't know about that part of the bill and you don't know if it's part of the federal
No, I mean,
constitution.
I knew that that part of the bill was in there, but as it was presented to us, it was all,
Goes
Yeah, but you
Yeah,
can't go on
so-
what people tell you, you gotta do your own research, yeah. And so all I'm gonna ask is that you do your own research, don't go with what the people in your committee tell you. That's a critical thing when it
Especially
goes to
not
our rights, our constitutional rights. Is just take a look at, get some other people's input besides who is in your committee.
so can I tell you about the 10 gun bills that we killed this year?
I appreciate that, I'm just
I
asking
mean,
you,
this
This is the
I'm
beginning
not
of
trying
chipping
to.
away of our constitutional
I
rights.
disagree with you. I disagree. I think you didn't have this right already in this bill. This is not a right that you currently enjoy.
But you said you don't know.
No, I don't know about the specific part of the 80% lower.
I know, that's what
I mean, I don't know if that's included in the federal piece, but what I heard from the NRA is that it's not an issue for them.
Okay, you did
So-
ask the NRA, you did ask somebody
Yeah,
else.
they told me that my
Your committee.
sterling record is intact. That's what they said. With my yes vote, my sterling record is intact.
All right, I'm
So-
okay with that, as long as you ask somebody else besides whoever's presenting the bill and you're
No, I
doing
mean,
your research.
we get input from so many different places. And it's not just the NRA, the Gun Owners Action League is another
I know,
organization.
there's
although
other
they're-
ones, yes.
But
This was not a big issue for the NRA, interestingly enough. So
Well, but the NRA is going through all kinds of
yeah, they're going through a bunch of
transition right now,
organizational
so you
challenges.
can't
But
really
that
lean on
aside,
them right now.
that aside, they're one, I mean, among a variety of other folks that we depend on both sides of the gun issues to get their opinions. The NRA's opinion on this particular issue, they
comment. When our gun rights are removed, which is definitely, you can see it moving that way, especially when the children who have been taught how to slaughter people are slaughtering their own kind. Children are killing children now, and when it all started with all these things that were accessible to children, I used to tell my husband, you wait, pretty soon children will be killing children. And they are, and they're using guns. But once you get rid of the guns, how are you going to get rid of the knives?
Well, they'll find something else,
Cars.
right? Cars,
Yeah,
knives.
I mean, Mexico has slaughtered over 80,000 people with knives, their own people in the cartels.
Yeah, it's just
So,
ridiculous.
you know, you can't stop. You've got to help society learn to value the human life.
Well, and that's the whole thing, right? We're seeing the degradation of that very thing, Carol, where life is minimized at every turn. And when parents try to teach their children, this year saw the greatest single attack since my time in the legislature that I saw on parents' rights. It was heartbreaking.
Absolutely.
So now you're in a situation where parents are being limited in what they can do for their own children, but we know that the strongest family units create the strongest citizens, and we're busily trying to erode that, and by we I don't mean we, but it's just, it's a very frustrating thing because you can see where it's going, because you're right. I just saw something about a car attack, right? But nobody's saying, ooh, we better really watch that. So people are going to find ways to do bad things to other people, and it's the vehicle to do that, whether it's a knife or a gun or a pipe. Think about poison,
A baseball bat,
anything. We cannot legislate everything.
Unfortunately, due in a large part for the fact that I got a speeding ticket during our last night, and so did,
I do too.
yes, I know.
Oh, you did too?
Yeah.
Same place.
It was a trap.
I guess we have time for one more question.
Actually, what I'm seeing is your signal callers over here saying is,
Yeah, let's take one more question and then we're out of here.
Thank you. Maybe a way that you can force the issue on the left to be kinder to gun rights is that the Constitution, state, federal both are contracts. They are legally binding contracts. And by swearing an oath to those things, you are swearing an oath to a contract and the requirements of that. Couch it in terms of you are contractually bound to do this or that. And this is what Article 1, Section 1 says, in part. Governments are established to protect and maintain individual rights. Article 1, Section 29 of the Washington Constitution says the provisions of this Constitution are mandatory. They don't have the luxury of being able to debate these gun things, rights in general, but guns are a big deal right now, and those are rights, and they have a requirement.
The good news for you is you're preaching to the choir.
I understand, but I'm talking about tactics on how to argue and cut them off
I
paths.
appreciate that. Unfortunately, we have to go.
So thank you all for coming out on this Memorial Day weekend and spending time with us. I really appreciate it. Again, thank you so much to the city of Yacolt,
thank you.
town of Yacolt.
Before you leave, I'd like to thank you guys for coming. Also extend a couple of invitations to you.